2.4, configure internal and external services for account administration. So there's a couple of different admin types you can be on a Palo firewall. Internal and external, essentially. That's how you can authenticate either with like a Radius or TACACS or LDAP server for external, or obviously you could have a locally defined user database on the Palo firewall. To determine the rights and privileges those users get, there's two different ways you can assign them. There's role-based, which is where you customly determine what access they get to either the CLI or the web interface or an XML API. And then there's dynamic. Dynamic is some pre-canned policies that come on the firewall. So role-based, again, this is where you just kind of determine, hey, I want a very specific set of privileges given to these users. Maybe I want my security team to just be able to look at, the traffic logs, but not be able to see the policies. Or maybe I want the administrators for some reason to only be able to create changes to object groups, but nothing to security policies. So you can get quite granular with these. There's a good screenshot further down. Here it kind of shows you, and I don't like that they do this backwards, but down here you can define your role-based profile. So here they're showing where the policy admin profile, they have pretty much everything appearing to be enabled for web UI, nothing enabled for XML API, and everything over here permitted for REST API. So you can see it gets quite granular, especially when you start looking at what you can and cannot check. In the monitor logs, you can only permit like traffic logs if you don't want them to see the URL they're getting to and stuff like that. So pretty cool stuff. You basically create the administrator, and then you go down here to the administrator type, determine if you want it to be dynamic or role-based, and select what you want. Dynamic roles, these are the pre-canned policies on the firewall. So you've got super user read-only, virtual system admin, virtual system administrator read-only, device admin, and device admin read-only. The biggest difference here between super user and device administrator is that the super user can create other administrative accounts, whereas the device administrator cannot create administrator accounts. If you are a virtual system administrator, you basically just have permission to that one vSys, and that's it. Obviously, if it says read only, you're not going to have privileges to write config. You can only read what that role allows you to. And again, on the virtual system admin, not every firewall allows you to use virtual systems. I don't believe the PA220s do, or the 200 series. So be aware of that. Not every firewall will be able to support this. Down here, they're showing the admin account configuration. So again, this is what it would look like if you were using a dynamic user. You would just select the dynamic role that you want to give whatever user you define up here. And here we're talking about the different ways you can authenticate. So obviously, yes, you can have a local database. External authentication types also support. Apparently, you can have none. That's new to me, but apparently you can use none. We've got Radius, LDAP, TACACS, SAML, and Kerberos. Most commonly, it's probably going to be LDAP and Radius, maybe TACACS. And again, they kind of do this backwards down here. The first thing you're going to do is actually create a service profile. So say I want to use LDAP, I can go in and define my servers and my settings. Or if I want to use Radius, I can do the same thing here, TACACS, et cetera, et cetera. So you actually define the server that you're going to connect to, the port, put in the credentials that you need to make that authentication happen. Once you have that, you're going to go into the authentication profile, and here in server profile, or I'm sorry, here in type right here, that's where you're going to define whether it's a radius or local database or whatever it is. Once you have that, the server profile will automatically appear, and you can define the server profile that you created down here. So that might be, in this case, it's the LDAP server profile. You could be the radius profile that you created or whatever. So once you get that, you have a few more settings you can work with, but that's pretty much it as far as creating the authentication profile. It's pretty straightforward and makes logical sense. Authentication sequence. So this is pretty neat. So it allows you to have multiple authentication profiles defined. So for instance, if your Active Directory domain goes down, that's super bad, but you could define a radius server after that. So if Active Directory stops responding to your LDAP requests, you could have some users defined on like a ICE server or some other radius server, and you would not be locked out of the box if as long as that second profile is actually working. So that's my use case for that I can think of, which would be ideal in any scenario. Admin account passwords. Um, this is just going to be for your local database users. So here you can define, you need a certain amount of characters. It gets expired after so many days, et cetera, et cetera. You can get pretty granular. You can see all the different settings that they define over here. And again, a password profile can be assigned to a local admin account. I don't know if they actually show it here, but if you go up here and you look at when you create your user, here in the password profile, you can select the profile that you create. They kind of seem to do things backwards on this document. I'm not sure why, but yeah. Then configuration logs. So this is where you're able to actually analyze the changes that were made on the firewall. So if you want to go back and look at who made a commit at 7 p.m. last Wednesday, you can go back and do that. You can tell whether it was the web client, the CLI, or Panorama that committed, whatever change and who it was, the time, all that good stuff. So it's pretty neat stuff. So that is the authentication piece of this in a nutshell. I thank you. I will see you in the next session.